The morning Celine Dupré walked into a pawn shop with her grandmother's nursing pin and a velvet box of military medals, she told herself she wasn't crying. It was just the cold. January in Sudbury does that to people, strips the warmth right out of you before you've even reached the parking lot. She'd rehearsed what she would say. I need to sell these. I know what they're worth. Please don't ask me why. She didn't rehearse what she would feel standing at that glass counter, watching a stranger's hands reach toward the only things she had left of the woman who raised her. Celine had been a registered nurse for 7 years, paediatric ward, Horizon Health Center, New Brunswick first, then a transfer to Health Sciences North in Sudbury 3 years ago when her grandmother's health started failing. Mamie Colette had lived alone in a small house on Spruce Street since Celine's grandfather died. Someone needed to be close. Celine was the only one left who would go. She didn't regret it. That was the thing people never seemed to understand when she tried to explain it later. She didn't regret any of it. Not the transfer, not the smaller apartment, not the quieter life. Mamie Colette had been worth every bit of it. A retired Army nurse herself, 40 years of service, 2 tours in Cyprus, a decade at the field hospital in Petawawa. The kind of woman who kept her back straight, even when the pain in her hips made it nearly impossible. The kind of woman who taught Celine how to change a dressing, how to hold a hand during a procedure without flinching, how to say you're going to be okay and mean it. She died on a Tuesday in October, quietly, the way she'd done most things. Celine was there. She held her hand. What happened next was not quiet. The trouble started, as trouble often does, with paperwork. Celine had requested bereavement leave, 3 days, which was all the collective agreement provided for a grandparent. She'd known it wouldn't be enough. Mamie Colette's estate was small but complicated. A house with a reverse mortgage, a pension survivor's benefit that needed to be contested, boxes and boxes of documents in both French and English that no one else in the family was willing to sort through. Celine had asked her charge nurse, a woman named Bergstrom, if she could extend her leave by a week using her accumulated vacation days. It seemed straightforward. She had 18 days banked. Bergstrom said she'd look into it. What Bergstrom actually did was flag the request to the unit director, a man called Haverstock, who decided, for reasons that were never made fully clear to Celine, that her timing was inconvenient. There was a staffing shortage. There was always a staffing shortage. He denied the extension and told Bergstrom to inform Celine she was expected back on the following Monday. Celine came back on Monday. She was exhausted and grief-stricken and still wearing, if she was honest, the same hollow look that hospitals put on people who've spent too much time on the wrong side of the bed. But she came back. 3 weeks later, a patient complaint was filed against her. She had never in 7 years received a patient complaint. The complaint alleged that Celine had been dismissive during a family meeting, that she'd seemed distracted and unresponsive, that she'd left the room before the conversation was finished. Celine remembered the meeting. She also remembered that she'd left the room because another child had coded 2 bays down and she was the only nurse on the floor. She'd documented it. She'd reported it. She'd done everything right. None of that seemed to matter to Haverstock. The formal review was initiated in November. By December, before Christmas, Celine was placed on administrative suspension pending investigation. She was told not to return to the unit. She was told in careful language that said everything without committing to anything that her position may not be available when the review concluded. She asked for a timeline. She was given a pamphlet about the Employee Assistance Program. She asked if the complaint had anything to do with her leave request. The HR coordinator looked at his desk. January came. Celine had savings. Not much, but some. She had her cat, a tabby named Rue, and her apartment on Elm Street with the radiator that knocked all night. And she had Mamie Colette's house, which was technically in probate and which she could neither sell nor live in because the reverse mortgage company had already begun their process. She applied for EI. She was told her suspension may constitute a disqualifying circumstance pending the outcome of the review. She was told to wait. She waited. She sent emails that weren't answered. She called the union rep, a cheerful man named Deschaines, who told her these things take time and that she needed to trust the process. She made a spreadsheet of her expenses. She deleted it because looking at it made her feel sick. By the second week of January, she was behind on rent. By the third week, she was choosing between her phone bill and her grocery run. She ate a lot of rice. She told no one. The medals had been in a shoebox at the back of her closet since she'd brought them from Mamie Colette's house. A silver nursing pin from 1973, the year her grandmother graduated. A Canadian Forces decoration. A United Nations medal from the Cyprus tour. And one more, smaller than the others, worn on a simple ribbon. Mamie Colette had never talked about that one. Celine had found it wrapped in tissue paper at the bottom of a cedar chest, tucked beneath a folded letter she hadn't read yet. She'd put it in the shoebox with the others and told herself she'd deal with it later. Later had run out. She drove to a pawn shop on Notre Dame Avenue on a Wednesday morning because she'd looked them all up online, and this one had decent reviews and didn't feel, from the outside, like a place that would make her feel worse than she already did. She sat in the parking lot for 11 minutes. She knew it was 11 minutes because she watched the clock on her dashboard and told herself she would go in when it changed to the next number. Then the next. Then the one after that. She went in. The shop was narrow and warm, which she hadn't expected. It smelled like machine oil and old wood. There were guitars on one wall and a glass case along the other side full of watches and rings. The man behind the counter was in his 60s, with a gray beard and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. His name tag said Gord. She set the shoebox on the counter. She started to say the line she'd rehearsed. She heard the door open behind her. She didn't turn around. She assumed it was another customer. She focused on the box, on keeping her voice level, on not making this into something theatrical when it was really just a transaction. People sold things every day. This was nothing unusual. Then something cold and wet pressed against the back of her hand. She looked down. There was a dog. A large shepherd mix with a tactical vest and a focused, deliberate quality to its attention that she recognized immediately as different from a pet. It had pressed its nose to her knuckles and was now standing absolutely still, looking up at her. Not excited, not jumpy, just present, as if it had been looking for her specifically and had found her. Soldier. Viens. The voice came from behind her. French-Canadian, slight, the kind of accent that meant the person had grown up speaking both and let them blend together over time. Celine turned. The man was maybe 40, in civilian clothes, dark jacket, worn jeans, but the way he held himself in a room was not civilian. She'd seen it before in the veterans who sometimes came through the hospital, a specific kind of stillness, an awareness of all the exits. He was looking at the dog, not at her, with an expression caught between apology and something else she couldn't name. Sorry, he said. He doesn't usually do that. Soldat, heel. The dog didn't move. The man looked at Celine then, and then at the shoebox on the counter, and something shifted in his face. She couldn't explain it later except to say that it was the look of a person who has just recognized something they weren't expecting to see. What's in the box? He asked. His voice was quiet, not intrusive, careful. She almost didn't answer. It wasn't his business, but the dog was still touching her hand, that steady nose-to-knuckle contact, and it did something to her that she couldn't quite defend against. She lifted the lid. He looked at the medals for a long moment. His jaw moved slightly, like he was working through something. Where did the ribbon come from? He pointed to the small one, the one from the tissue paper, the one she didn't know about. My grandmother, she said. She was a forces nurse. I'm not sure what that one is. He was quiet for a moment. Then, may I? She nodded, mostly because the dog still hadn't moved, and she felt, irrationally, that the dog would be disappointed if she said no. He picked up the small medal, turned it over. His thumb moved across the back, reading something there, and his expression went somewhere private for a second before he brought it back. This is a mention in dispatches, he said. It's a Commonwealth honor, not given often. It means your grandmother did something during active service that was specifically recognized by a commanding officer, something beyond what was required of her. Celine stared at it. She never told me, she said. She never told me about any of them, really. She didn't talk about that part of her life. A lot of them didn't. He set the medal down gently, like it was something that needed to be handled carefully. He looked at her, really looked, the way people sometimes do in hospitals when they're trying to assess more than vital signs. You're a nurse, he said. She blinked. How did you? You have a lanyard in your coat pocket. Hospital ID. He paused. And you've been holding your breath since you walked in here, which is something people do when they're about to do something that goes against everything they want to do. She laughed, short, surprised, and then horrified to feel that her eyes had gone wet. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. "Don't," she told herself. "Not here, not now." The dog rested its chin on the edge of the counter. "I'm Philippe Garot," the man said, "retired Canadian Army, search and rescue." He offered his hand. She shook it. "Celine Dupré." "Tell me what happened, Celine," she told him. She didn't mean to tell him all of it, but Gord had quietly disappeared into the back of the shop with a cup of coffee and a tact that she found herself grateful for, and the dog, Soldat, had put his head in her lap the moment she sat down on the stool Garot offered her, and it turned out that it was very difficult to be brief and strategic when a search and rescue dog was radiating warmth against your thighs and looking up at you like you were the only person in the room. She told him about the bereavement leave and the denial, about the complaint and the suspension, about the HR pamphlet and the union rep and the spreadsheet she'd deleted, about Mamie Colette and the cedar chest and the tissue paper. Garot listened the way she'd been trained to listen in pediatrics, fully, without filling in the gaps before she'd reached them, without offering solutions before she'd finished the problem. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. "You were suspended because you took 3 days off to bury the woman who raised you," he said, "and now you're here selling her medals because they won't pay you while they investigate a complaint that anyone with 2 hours and your shift logs could disprove." Yes. That's what happened. "Okay," he said. "I'd like to help." She almost said no. The word was right there. She was exhausted from needing things from people, and from asking, and from the silence that came back when she did. But Soldat chose that moment to press his nose firmly into her palm again, with what she could only describe as emphasis. "I don't know what you could do," she said. "Probably more than the union rep." He said it without edge, just fact. "I have a friend. She's a nurse practitioner. She's dealt with wrongful discipline cases before. And I sit on the board of a veteran services advocacy group. Your grandmother's record might matter for, well, let me make some calls first. Then we'll see." "Why?" she asked. He glanced at Soldat. "He chose you," he said simply. "In 8 years, he has never put his head in someone's lap unsolicited. He was trained to find people who need to be found." He shrugged, one shoulder. "I trust him more than I trust most people." The calls Garot made over the next 48 hours were quiet and efficient and produced results that 2 months of Celine's own efforts had not. The nurse practitioner was a woman named Dr. Adjay Mensah, brisk and precise and apparently terrifying to hospital administrators across 3 provinces. She reviewed Celine's suspension documentation and her shift logs and the original complaint in under an hour and used the phrase procedurally indefensible 4 times in a single email. The shift log was the thing. The timestamp showing Celine had left the family meeting because of the code. It was there documented exactly as she'd said. The charge nurse's own notes confirmed it. What hadn't been included in Haverstock's investigation file, despite being directly relevant, was any of that documentation. Someone had assembled a very selective picture doctor. Adjay Mensah filed a formal complaint with the College of Nurses of Ontario on Celine's behalf, challenging the legitimacy of the investigation process. She also contacted the union at a level above Deschênes, which produced a sudden and remarkable increase in everyone's sense of urgency. Meanwhile, Garot had made a different kind of call. He'd reached a retired colonel he knew through the Veteran Services Board, a woman who'd served with Mamie Colette's unit in Petawawa decades ago. She didn't remember Colette directly, but she knew the unit records, and she knew a historian at the Canadian War Museum who could pull service files. 3 days later, Celine received a scanned document in her email. Her grandmother's full service record, including the citation attached to the mention in dispatches. Colette Dupré had been cited for her actions during a training accident in 1987. A fuel line failure had caused a fire in an administrative building at the Petawawa base. 3 soldiers had been trapped. The base nurse had not been on duty. Colette had been walking past on her way to the commissary. She had gone in anyway. She had pulled all 3 of them out before the fire suppression system activated. She had triaged them in the parking lot with her personal first aid kit and the contents of someone's gym bag. All 3 had survived. She had never mentioned it. Not once. Not to anyone, as far as anyone could tell. Celine sat at her kitchen table and read the citation twice. Then she folded her arms on the table and put her head down and let herself cry properly, the way she'd been too busy or too practical to do since October. Rue climbed onto her back and settled there with the serene indifference of cats. The hospital investigation concluded in February. The complaint against Celine was found to be unsubstantiated. The investigating panel, now operating under considerably more scrutiny than Haverstock had anticipated, noted that the documentation presented in the initial file had been incomplete, and that the complainant, upon a second interview, acknowledged that Celine had communicated clearly before leaving the room and that they had not fully understood the circumstances at the time. Celine was offered reinstatement with full back pay for the period of her suspension. She was also offered, from Haverstock himself, a written apology. It was 3 sentences long and felt like it had been drafted by legal. She read it twice, decided it was sufficient, and filed it away. Bergstrom, she heard later, had been moved to a different unit. Haverstock was still in his position, but there was apparently a more formal review of the unit's HR practices underway. These things moved slowly. She'd learned that. But they moved. There was a moment, on the day she returned to the ward, that she thought about a lot afterward. She was walking down the hall toward the nurse's station, her station, with the bulletin board where someone had put up a picture of a hedgehog in a Christmas sweater that had been there since November, and a small voice said her name. She turned. It was one of her patients, a 7-year-old named Benny, who'd been admitted the week before she was suspended and who she hadn't been able to say goodbye to properly. He was sitting up in his bed with a drawing in his hands, a nurse in a blue uniform with enormous round eyes, standing next to what appeared to be a dinosaur, though she thought it might have been meant as something else. "I made it when you were gone," he said. "It's you. The dinosaur is your helper." She took the drawing. She looked at the dinosaur. "I'm going to put this on my fridge," she said. "My mom says you're the best nurse," he said. "She said you were the one who didn't leave." Celine had to look at the ceiling for a second. It was a thing she'd learned in pediatrics. When you need a moment, look up. It's less obvious than looking away. "I wasn't going to leave," she said. She went back to Gord's shop on a Saturday in March, on a day when the temperature had lifted just enough that the air didn't hurt. She had the shoebox with her. Garreau was there. She'd texted him, which felt strange and comfortable at the same time. The easy shorthand they'd developed over 2 months of logistical emails and the occasional coffee when he was in the neighborhood with Soldat. She'd learned that Soldat was 9 years old, a Belgian Malinois mix, trained in wilderness search and rescue, and now technically retired, though Garreau maintained that no one had told Soldat that. She'd learned that Garreau had done 2 Afghanistan rotations, one with CSAR, and had left the forces at 38 with a knee that would never be the same and a complicated relationship with sleeping in rooms that had more than one entrance. She'd learned that he made excellent coffee and that he had, on 2 separate occasions, caught her crying in her car in a Tim Hortons parking lot and had simply appeared at her window with a cup and not asked any questions. She set the box on the counter in front of Gord. "I'm not selling them," she said. "I just wanted you to see them properly, both of you." She took the medals out one by one, the nursing pin, the CD, the UN ribbon, and the mention in dispatches, with its plain red and blue ribbon and the name Dupré stamped on the back in letters that felt more solid than anything she'd touched in months. She'd had a frame made. Simple wood, nothing elaborate. A copy of the citation beside the medal, printed on cardstock. It was going on the wall of her apartment, next to the kitchen where she had her morning coffee, because she wanted to see it first thing, and she wanted to remember what it looked like when someone chose to go in anyway. Gord looked at the citation for a long time. "Hell of a woman," he said finally. "Yes," Celine said. "She really was." Soldat sat beside her. He was leaning against her leg in the way that large dogs do when they have decided that you are their person today and possibly for the foreseeable future. She put her hand on his head. Outside on Notre Dame, a city bus went past, and someone's car radio played something she didn't recognize. The January cold that had driven her through that door 2 months ago was gone, replaced by something that felt, tentatively, like the possibility of spring. She didn't think about what would have happened if she'd sold the medals. She didn't let herself. Some doors, once you don't walk through them, don't need to be examined too closely. She thought instead about Mamie Colette walking past a building that was on fire, on a Tuesday in 1987 with her first aid kit and nowhere she absolutely had to be, choosing to go in. She thought about how that one choice had rippled forward through 38 years, through a woman's whole life, through a granddaughter who became a nurse because she'd watched her grandmother hold a hand without flinching, through a cold morning in January in a pawn shop on Notre Dame Avenue, through a dog who pressed his nose into a stranger's palm and refused to leave. Some things don't announce themselves, they just happen, and then they keep happening, long after the person who started them is gone. Celine picked up the framed medal. She tucked it under her arm. She said goodbye to Gord. She walked out into the March air with Garot beside her and Soldat at her heel. And somewhere in the city, in a hospital ward with a hedgehog picture on a bulletin board, a 7-year-old named Benny was probably drawing another dinosaur, and the nurse's station was probably short-staffed again, and someone, somewhere, was being told, "You're going to be okay," and meaning it. She was going back to that. She was going back to all of it, and she was ready.